Hello, everybody, and welcome to St. Pete Timebank's monthly podcast. Oh, tonight I'm so excited because I have, I just lost my script. Well, this is going to be fun. I have Laura Oldanie
we're already off to a great start.
We're going to have fun no matter what, right? Marie Nelson,
yes.
Tampa Bay Timebank. She said, if it's not fun, it's not sustainable. But let me get back to business here. This is our monthly podcast. And tonight we have Laura Oldanie from Rich and Resilient Living with us. And Laura, I'm going to find your bio so I can read it. But while I'm doing that, I want you to say howdy to everybody.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us and spending your Friday evening or afternoon or whatever it is, wherever you are with us. Very much looking forward to the conversation. Those of you that know me know that time banking is near and dear to my heart, and I am a big cheerleader champion of time banking.
Oh, everywhere I go, you are talking about time banking. So let me get to that bio. And I know your bio is much more extensive than what you gave us, but Laura told me that she is a green living and wealth coach. And she blogs at richandresilientliving.com. We'll have that up on a little banner for you here in a minute. So you can check it out yourself, where she explores money and lifestyle choices for a regenerative future. Her goal is to help people achieve financial resiliency. So I've known you for, well, at least since about 2017, because that's when you became a Timebank member. And I think I might have known you a little bit before that. What in the world got you into this, like what some people may think, not the people that we know and love, right? But some people may think that it's a way out there kind of way of thinking. Well, it's not capitalistic. It's, what got you into this way of thinking, this way of living? How long ago?
It's been a process of probably 10 years now.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of concrete steps, but it sounds like this is a conversation that we have some time for. So I'm going to backtrack it. And
we have an hour and we can talk about whatever we want.
Give you the longer version.
There you go.
I mean, if I backtrack it, to my childhood, I have very service-oriented parents.
Okay.
Volunteering and just helping people was a big part of my childhood. And I don't know where this came from, because we weren't a camping or really green family. But I remember when I was in high school, I persuaded my sister, I think it was my senior year of high school, that for Christmas we should get my parents some low flow shower heads as the Christmas gift, because of the environment, looking to have some kind of environmental impact. So I know that I was at least cognizant and thinking this way already a little bit in high school. And then
in high school, and without having to give away your age, how long ago was that?
That would have been 1987, 1988. So yes.
Oh, this is like you were on the cusp of it when you were in high school. I mean, that's incredible. And this is something that I didn't even start thinking about until I turned late 40. You know what I mean? And you really had a beautiful vantage point to where this is how you were raised. This is what happened.
Like I said, it wasn't like my parents thought this way, or that it was a part of our childhood. We weren't camping and like thinking about like, okay, I mean, we were conscious of lights and water, but I think it was as much from a cost-effective standpoint as an environmental standpoint. But it had somehow been seeded in there in my, by the time I was a high school senior. And then I went to college here in St. Pete. I went to Eckerd, and I didn't study environmentalism. I studied international studies, but I ended up studying abroad, and, just really I studied in Spain. And so even just seeing the European lifestyle that is less energy intensive, living in smaller apartments, more multi-generational living, drying your clothes on a clothes rack being the standard, that type of thing definitely registered with me. And then after college, the only thing I wanted to do, the only thing I applied for was to become a Peace Corps volunteer. And so I went to Poland with the Peace Corps and liked it so much that I extended for a third year, because usually Peace Corps is only 2 years. And I was teaching high school English there. And again, Poland was really fundamental for me in, starting to recognize living a rich life without having a lot of money, seeing how these humble households took so much pride in their yards. And at that point, I wasn't into gardening, but I was just so struck by how beautiful the yards were, how there were flowers in so many yards, and here are these people that aren't, have come out of a different economic way of thinking under communism, having been under communism, but there's still so much richness in little things in their lives. Again, the multi-generational living was especially something I encountered in Poland, and taking care, generations living together, grandparents, the parents, and the young children, and the advantages of that, the free childcare, the free elder care. That was quickly changing in some ways, as tends to happen when more money comes into an economy or a country, and people were moving out from their parents' homes, but just seeing the benefits that it could provide when it existed. And just there wasn't the concept of disposable income.
Okay.
You didn't go roller skating. You didn't go, to a theme park the same way. At least not, it wasn't done as frequently. And so this whole idea of like disposable entertainment and money to even afford that. So many people knew how to play the guitar or sing or a musical instrument. And there were so many bonfires, it was like you still had such a rich life and such strong friendships and so much fun, but it didn't involve all of these, like the noise and the unnecessary things and spending money in a way that isn't necessary. So that was super impactful on my thinking.
And so how long were you in Poland?
So as a Peace Corps volunteer, I was there 3 years, but I stayed another year and studied at a Polish university, just did a certificate in Polish language and culture, came back to the US and did my master's degree essentially in Polish studies. Wow. And so I went back to Poland during grad school and studied for the summer in Krakow. And then after grad school, I won a State Department fellowship. So I went back to Poland, this time to Warsaw, and worked at the US Embassy in Warsaw for 2.5 years with the State Department fellowship. So again, all of that was just reinforcing these different perspectives and different things that people valued, and different ways people were living their lives and still finding fulfillment.
Such a drastic difference from life in St. Petersburg, Florida, right? In the big city. Well, it's not that big of a city, but it's a big enough city, and especially here in the United States, totally different.
Yes.
Wow. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when I first went to Poland as a Peace Corps volunteer, it was completely different, because I ended up in a village of 5,000 people. And so a contrast to St. Petersburg, Florida.
Yeah.
And it was just wonderful. It was a lot. The other thing is, here I was sent to Poland to help them because they were, coming out of this communist system and a lower income country. But the town that I got posted to in the Peace Corps is actually just the most lovely village. It was a writers retreat for Polish writers, and there's a beautiful park. It's the heart capital of Poland. They have a system of sanatoriums. I think it's more of a European thing. And so there's water. It's a water source in Nałęczów. There's a bottled water that comes out of there. And so the water and the treatments there are good for the heart. So people with heart problems throughout Poland come to these sanatoria in Nałęczów, and then there's this beautiful palace in the park in Nawenchuk. This is the village where I was. That is, it's a palace that has a museum in honor of one of the many writers that was coming to that part of the country. So it was just an absolutely lovely place to be. And so when I talk about coming up, getting that appreciation for flowers and growing food, seeing there's a system in Europe, some people may be familiar with, of allotments. And it's that's the British word for it. So a lot of people in Europe live in urban areas and they don't have a space to grow their own garden.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll often save land at the edge of the city and divide it up into little plots. And people who live in the heart of the city can then go to the edge of the city and have their own little plot where they can grow their food.
Wow.
So
they
can garden there.
Not exactly the same, but similar to our community gardens.
It's the closest thing, but this is more an individual plot. Well, sometimes in the midst of others, and oftentimes people will build sheds out there. They might go spend the weekend out at their allotment. Or
is it something that they own? Is it something that they own? Oh, yes. Okay, they own it. All right.
Or they at least have rights to it.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how it works, and that may differ in each country.
Wow. So what an impact on you as a young adult.
Yes, to see all of these different ways things are handled. And then, so I came back from the State Department and ended up moving to Washington, D.C. And I lived in D.C. for about 11 years.
Oh my God. After all of this, wait, stop. After all this small community, beautiful flowers, warm heart, guitar, fires, and you go to DC.
Well, all right. So there's a reason why I went to DC. There were a couple reasons.
But what a contrast.
Yes, but when I moved back to DC, that was from Warsaw. It wasn't from the village. The village had been the Peace Corps days, and I had gradually moved into bigger and bigger cities as I'd lived in Poland.
Okay.
But the reason I knew that when I left, when I finished in Poland, that I wanted to come back to the US, and I knew there were only going to be two cities I was going to consider moving to. One was New York and the other was DC. And that's because I wanted public transportation. That's another thing that, I encountered having studied in Spain, having lived in Poland so long. Even in my village, I used public transportation to get to the train station that was out of town, to get to the closest bigger town and some of the other towns. And I am a huge supporter of public transportation, and that's what I wanted to move into, was a place where I could rely on public transportation. And I didn't get a car in DC until at least my third or fourth year there. And the only reason I did eventually is because I had some friends who were still in the State Department who were leaving the country, and they gave me their older car. I thought, okay, if someone's going to give me a car, by then I had bought my house, and I had already made several trips to the Home Depot on the metro, carrying several gallons of paint, on the metro, from the metro. So I thought, okay, as a homeowner, this might not be such a bad thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean about DC. I actually went there for a job promotion in 2010. Unfortunately, I was there for 9/11. So my stint there didn't last but barely a year. But yeah, mass transit everywhere. You just hop on a bus that takes you to a metro that you walk to work, So I get it. So, okay, well, thanks for clarifying that, because I went small country in, city in Poland to, oh my God, DC, what a culture shock. But you had gradually grown up to that. Okay, so now you're in DC and you've got mass transit and ethnic food and culture like crazy. How in the world did we get to Florida?
Okay, so while I was living in DC, I worked for two different nonprofits.
Oh, okay.
And I really liked the work. I really liked my coworkers at both jobs. The first job, which I especially loved, but probably gave too much of my love and energy to, because it involved a lot of international travel, and is probably working more than was a healthy work-life balance.
Hmm.
I ended up losing that job because they closed their DC office and moved the staff to New York. And I had just bought my house in DC and I didn't want to move to New York to keep the job. But then I found a job with a second nonprofit. And again, I had a great team that I worked with. The work was meaningful enough, but it ended up being a lot of emphasis. Both jobs were education related,
Okay.
policy programs. And with this second job, I ended up getting heavily involved with early childhood education policy, which I think is so important. I have so much respect for people that do this work. And it's so funny because I don't have children. I have known since I was 16 that I don't want to have children. I never changed my nieces and nephews' diapers. And then people were laughing that know me so well that I ended up working and being this champion of early childhood education. But it just wasn't as important as it felt. It wasn't my calling. It wasn't fulfilling me in the way I wanted to feel fulfilled, especially given the hours I was putting in on it. And I realized at that job, this is kind of really where the shift starts, that my position was being paid for by some of our grants, our funders. We had a good bit of grant funding for our education work. And it dawned on me that, my boss really held me in high regard. He knew I brought a lot of value to the team. It was an outreach position, so I held a lot of value for the organization because I had the relationships and the contacts.
Right.
And it dawned on me that I might be able, we were funding in those grants, we were hiring consultants and people to help us deliver programming and services. So I thought, maybe I could write myself into these grants and that my employer could replace me, replace my position and then still have me. So it would be an even better situation for them. And I could work part-time as a consultant doing this work that I'm usually spending 40 or 50 hours a week on. And luckily my boss went for it.
Wow.
And so
enter entrepreneur.
So, I did that. And at the same time, I had put a bathroom in the basement of my house. So I moved myself into the basement and I took on a roommate and let the roommate have the upstairs. That basically covered my mortgage.
Nice.
And so that took the pressure off. And at about the same time, that's when I discovered permaculture, because permaculture is a big part of shaping my thinking and my work. And so for those that don't know permaculture, there are a bunch of different ways to define it. I like to think about it as a way to look at nature's closed loop, no waste, abundance-based system as the model and apply that to any area of our lives. It's a divine design system. It's a set of designers' tools. And so that was about the time I discovered permaculture. About the same time, I also came across Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, which was a radical shift in thinking about lifestyle design for me, intentionally thinking about what I wanted my life to look like and how I could design different elements of it to support that. Another thing I discovered about that same time was the much loved book, Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. So really starting to see, I'm exchanging my life energy for money. And is that exchange always worth it? And are there ways I can think differently about how I spend my money to really be cognizant of every time I'm spending it, that's some of that life energy that I'm spending. Is it worth all of the work I'm going to need to do, all of those hours I'm going to need to work to have that money? So that was another important piece of the putting this puzzle together. And then one other element at the same time was being introduced by a friend to what has come to be referred to as FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early.
Okay.
And so again, it's this lifestyle design, how looking at the financials and thinking about, if I don't spend like everybody else and I start saving a little more and investing a little differently, maybe I'm not going to retire at 30 like some people are doing, but maybe I don't need to work as hard or as long if I just make some adjustments in my thinking and my earning, my spending, my saving, and my investing.
And it's amazing how a little change here makes like the trajectory. I make a little change here and the trajectory gets wider and wider and wider, and it makes a big impact. I want to back up to permaculture, because the first time I heard that word, and probably for the first 3 years I heard that word, I just heard the word permaculture and I was like, huh? What does that mean? And I know you gave it a real quick definition, and maybe half of the readers or listeners, or maybe even 3/4 of the listeners know what that is, because we know a lot of permaculture people. But for the people who don't, just explain that a little bit more about that closed loop system. So in nature, permaculture is what?
So if we think about the way in a forest, for example, or even parts of your yard, there's no waste in nature. Everything serves a purpose and gets reused. So the leaves drop, they decompose, they enrichen the soil, and then something's going on, below the soil, where what's going on, what's coming down from the leaves is adding value down there, and it's feeding up into the trees again. And that's a very simple oversimplification of it, but it's this idea that there's no waste, and that there's this intelligence and beauty in nature where everything serves a purpose and is used and is very intelligently designed.
And so those principles that are set up behind that permaculture wisdom, if you will, now you're bringing into, it sounds like this perfectly orchestrated thing in your life that happened, where this drops and this drops and this drops, and you have this rounded out, oh my God, there's so much more. Like, if I would have known for 30 years that I didn't have to work as hard as I worked, and I'm saying that now as a retired woman, but still it's like, oh my God, if I could have known. How lucky are you? To have seen this. No, really, to have been introduced to this as a young adult, and then seen what you've seen, and been involved with the State Department and education, and saw all these different things that weren't necessarily serving you, and being able to get little pieces of light from the universe, if you will, that have shown you a different way to be able to live and treat your finances. And it's not all about money. I mean, that's just a beautiful thing. I finally got there myself, and it's kind of just been a natural progression. And yours is a natural progression as well. But I'm just so fascinated by you. You're one of my heroes. When I look at you,
thank you,
and how you live, it's like, wow, that is just incredible.
Well, and I do want to be transparent and clear for people that I am not completely, living off of the return on my investments yet, like retired people do. There are variations of FIRE. Some people wanted to get to FIRE so they didn't have to work anymore, right? Because they didn't enjoy their job. Some people wanted to get there to have the financial security, but didn't necessarily want to not work at all. You have to be very thoughtful about what you're retiring into, because a lot of retired people get depressed. They haven't thought that through, and that piece, and then they've lost their purpose.
A lot of retired people die. They retire and they die. I mean, it happens. Yep. I hear it all over the place. And it's because that loss in purpose, so you're purposeful about what you do. You have a system that is rich, that you live by, and it might not be anybody else's idea of perfection, but it's yours. And it's what you have, and it's what's working for you. And I think the great part about it is that we all can glean from that. We all can learn from that.
Exactly. It's going to be different for everybody, just like you said. My pieces, the pieces of my puzzle are different than the pieces of your puzzle, and they're different than anybody else's puzzle. And that's the beauty of it, though, is just really, it's for everyone to get a sense of what they want their life to look like, and then reverse engineer and design it from there.
Step backwards, like,
Design
where's the
backwards
goal
from
now? How do
there.
I get there? Yeah. Let's talk about the word resilience.
Okay.
Because it's a very rich word. It can mean a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different things to a lot of different people. So, what is resilience for you?
It's multiple things. And I'm so glad you took the conversation this way, because that was one of the notes I made mentally.
Hey,
Because
hey,
you
we're
just,
connected here.
yes. I mean, a big part for me, and what I'm doing, like you said, you read it in my bio, it's financial resilience and financial resilience. There, for me, in this reality of our capitalist system currently, financial resilience is a big part of the puzzle. I mean, I love time banking, and I talk about other forms of capital, but I acknowledge the value of and the role of financial capital. And so, in terms of this, starting from where we are talking around lifestyle design, I think the resilience comes in designing your life for resilience, so that you have enough of that, so that financial capital or other forms of capital, so that you don't feel like you have to make decisions because out of fear, that you don't have to stay in a soul crushing job, that there's at this angle of resilience, there's a lot of connection to agency, having personal agency, and this concept that comes up in the FIRE community a lot of FU money, so that you're not, if you have a really horrible work situation, you're not beholden to it. You can get out of there. You've got the agency, you've got the financial resilience to get out of there. And, with time banking, I think time banking is a big part of resilience as well. It's the resilience beyond money, beyond the financial capital, and the social capital that it enriches our lives with, especially, is super important. And in general, I think with all of the uncertainty in the world right now, a lot of it is financial for people. That's just the way our culture and society are structured. But I think resilience in the face of climate change, in the face of these geopolitical situations, having the skills, the knowledge, the mental fortitude to get through all of this and be resilient in the face of it is really, really important.
And it's not something necessarily that is easy to attain.
No.
Yeah.
No, and I think
not a magic pill. It's not like,
no.
I'm going to apply permaculture principles to my life and everything's going to be hunky-dory in 2 weeks. Nature doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens.
And yep. And we're all hardwired differently. I am definitely more hardwired towards optimism. And I think that's a great benefit when it comes to resilience. Resilience, especially the mental resilience, can be a lot harder. Eco-anxiety or any kind of anxiety is a lot harder to overcome, if that's not your baseline.
Yeah, it really is. And I had a personal experience with that this past year, because with COVID and everything else that was going on, it was very easy to feel penned in and closed in and dark, and where is the end of everything, and my life was taken away from me, and now I'm being forced to live differently, kind of thing. And so I had to turn that around to, what can I see right here, right now, that I'm pleased with, and that optimism. I always thought optimistic was looking outside and it's raining and you're saying it's not raining. It's like, wait a minute, it's raining. But it's looking outside and it's raining and realizing that there's still flowers and the rain is doing what it's supposed to do, and I have an umbrella. Wow, let's go play in the puddles. So
there you go.
So what does a day in the life of Laura look like? Or a week in the life of Laura? Because you're
Okay,
busy. I mean,
well,
you are pretty busy. You're doing social media and you're guest speaking. And so, what is it like to be Laura Oldanie for a day or a week?
every day varies a little bit in that, maybe one day there's more time writing a blog post, or maybe one day is working on some social media posts, maybe working on a video for TikTok or Instagram, where I've just started posting my short videos to YouTube, and hope eventually I'll start making some longer form videos there. So there's a lot of the content work, emailing. I live a mile from my boyfriend, who's a very good cook. So a number of days a week, I'll bike ride down for lunch with Albert, who's thoughtfully and kindly made me lunch, and I'll get some exercise and fresh air in that way. If I'm lucky. The one thing, when I film my videos, I try to go outside and do it. I just love being outside as much as possible. In terms of, going back to lifestyle design and thinking about that was one of the key elements for me. Was when I moved away from DC, I wanted to live somewhere where I was going to be compelled to be outside a lot. So I try to get that in a good bit, and just, I feel so fortunate to have moved. I had been in St. Pete and moved to Gulfport not long before the pandemic set in. And it was so good that I was only a mile from Albert, even though we weren't that far away. It just made it so much easier to get together when you're only a mile away. And living in Gulfport with so much to do, Albert's yoga class on Friday mornings on the beach, just so many friends here. It's just, it truly, I don't get in my car that often, and because it's such a bikeable life here, or biking down into St. Pete, to go out. When I do get in my car, so what does a day in the life of Laura look like? As you know, I don't know how many of the listeners know, I'm a very avid dumpster diver.
I was hoping you would talk about that. I got to preface this. When I met Laura and she talked about dumpster diving, I'm like, oh my God, really? Are we going to do this? And we did an exchange in the Timebank, didn't we? And we went to, I don't know if we're going to name names here of stores, but we went to a pretty prominent, nice store that had a dumpster. And I brought home a case of honey, a case of raw honey in little teeny bottles that lasted me so long. And this was something that was going to go into the landfill. And suddenly dumpster diving took on a totally different connotation for me, I'm really glad that you brought that up. Talk about it. How did you find out about it?
Oh, goodness. I don't remember how I first found out about dumpster diving, but it was while I was still living in DC. I remember not long before I left, I had connected with an intentional community, or like a co-housing community in Tacoma Park outside of DC. And at that point, they had someone living there who was a very active dumpster diver, and he had a route that some of the people that lived in the house with him, he'd take them out, I think, once a week. And I think at that point, like 80% of the food the house was eating came from these dumpster diving excursions. So they said I could go with them one night. And, it was to some major chain stores, upper end chain stores. And I think that night I mostly came home with flowers, but I thought, well, we're not getting in the dumpsters. I have never gotten in a dumpster.
Nope.
They were getting some really good food. And I went around my neighborhood the next day giving away bouquets of flowers, and people were really excited. And that was, like I said, it was not long before I moved after that. And I don't know why I didn't try it, because after that I was a nomad for a couple of years, mostly house sitting and traveling out west. And it never dawned on me all that time. I spent so much money on food and never thought to check all those dumpsters. But once I got settled here in St. Pete, it was something that was top of mind for me. I really wanted to, check out the areas and find, see if it was viable here. And it sure is. 6 years later, here I am.
You still do a regular routine of those tours? Okay. So
yeah.
for any of you that are in St. Pete Timebank and you want to know about it, hit Laura up. You can get a little dumpster diving lesson, and you never know what you're going to wind up getting. It's really a surprise. It's really a surprise.
And so, I don't do it quite as much now that I live in Gulfport, because the shops are a little further away. So I'll try to just do it, maybe once a week, or if I'm driving somewhere else, Albert, my boyfriend, he calls it pay for the trip. The dumpster dive. I call it my carbon offset. That's
carbon offset.
Driving is dumpster diving. And actually, right before being here, coming home for the show, I had gone downtown St. Pete to the USF St. Petersburg campus, because this is dorm move-out week. And university students, they're notorious, the students, for throwing stuff out at the end of the semester. And so in other years, I've rescued mini refrigerators and printers. And I think I'm too late this year. I think the move out happened much earlier this week. So I'll have to shift my timing. But there's just so much at college campuses at the end of the semester. And thrift stores are another place people don't think about. But about 80%, I think I read recently, of what gets donated to thrift stores doesn't make it on their shelves. A lot of the clothing gets sent off to lower income countries. Things get resold or done, but things that they're handled in ways that aren't positive. And a lot of it ends up in the dumpster. And before I really started working on my blog and coaching business, when I lived at my other house, I lived closer to a thrift store, and I could just ride my bike. That was a great way to dumpster dive, is when I can ride my bike and do it. And one year I probably made $3,000 to $5,000 selling what I was rescuing out of thrift store and grocery store dumpsters.
So
not the food. I wasn't food, but
there's some residual income there.
Yes.
So it's a way that brings in some of that money that you can't necessarily earn in your daytime job, if you're stuck in a 9 to 5. So
yeah. And it was keeping things out of the waste stream, things that were still perfectly usable.
That's the thing that totally amazes me, how much we dispose of here in the United States.
Yes.
Did you find that in Spain or in Poland?
Not as much, certainly less, but I also imagine that it's more now than it was. Mm-hmm. I think, when I first got to Poland, this isn't about waste, but it's a change. Not as many people had cars. So there were lots of slower commuter trains between different smaller towns and bigger towns. And I think those have, many of those are no longer run because people have cars. So there are far more cars on the road. And I'm pretty sure that, yes, the level of waste produced has increased as well.
Increased a lot more. I was in some of our travels. A lot of you know that I'm traveling full time in a teeny travel trailer now around the country. And I was with some people in Old Town, Florida, which is about 2.5 hours north of St. Pete. And they went on like Facebook Marketplace, and up there, rather than selling on Facebook Marketplace, people are getting rid of things just for free. And she got like a new water filtration system for this place that she bought, and even the local hardware store puts out things that they no longer have use for, and some of them are perfectly fine. Like there was a box and it had a toilet in it, and the box was wet, so she thought, oh, maybe it got damaged. She got it home and the box was brand new and nothing was wrong, but the box was wet. And all she had to do was
good.
So this is like, there is all of these things out there. I'm reminded of your talk of the permaculture in nature. Oftentimes we don't see what's beyond right in front of us. So things like
Yes.
dumpster diving and these other things that you're talking about, they're there, but they're not a part of our everyday lives. And if we just can somehow get our minds open up by communicating with people like you, following your blog, reading the books that you read, and seeing where you get your motivation, we can find out things that we can do. There's always something we can do, in our lives to make ourselves more rich and resilient.
Yes. And thank you for steering the conversation in that direction again. Oh, BJ, yes, we are sisters. Because it's such an important point that I want to stress to people. We get so limited with blinders on in our thinking about how we have to earn money, how wealth can come into our lives, what is of value. And yes, the dumpster diving and the waste stream is a big one. There is no such thing as waste. There are only misdirected resources and poorly designed systems. And
Say that
so
again. Say it again.
there is
There
no
is no.
such thing as waste.
Wow.
There are only misdirected resources and poorly designed systems. And so that's the waste is a big one. There's so much of it and it's having such a negative impact on our planet. But it's not just waste. It's just us looking to our jobs, to the money economy, to the store shelves, to meeting our needs. And, we overlook so much if we can just find the time to slow down and think differently or think things through more. I mean, even something as simple as you think about how so many people are pouring Roundup on the weeds in their yards.
Oh,
And so often those weeds are so healthy and so nutrient dense, far more nutrient dense and healthy than what the same people are going to spend their money on in the store. Even if it's just dandelions that people are buying in health food stores, and then other people are putting on these horrible chemicals in their yard and then spending money on things. And yet there's this resource. There is at the house next to me, there's a Java plum tree, which is invasive here in Florida. And there are a lot of them, but I have not seen anyone doing anything with this tree. It's more well known. I think it comes from India or Southeast Asia. So I've seen videos on YouTube of Indians, people in those countries eating them and adding like spices and sugar and salt to them. But the whole tree is medicinal. The fruits are a little astringent for American standards, but if you get them at the peak, they're pretty good. You can make vinegar from them, cook with them, but it's a completely overlooked resource here that is part of my retirement plan. When I'm older, I'm going to, there are 3 of these trees right around me. There's the one next door, 2 in the alleys near me. They just fall all over the sidewalks, the fruit in September here. And it's just a shift. No one's thinking about it. The whole tree, the bark, the leaves, everything
and that's
is really good.
That's the permaculture again, because
Yeah.
we're looking at the whole thing, not just the fruit.
Not
just the fruit. Yep. So my goodness, we're 42 minutes into this thing already. We got about 15, 17 minutes left. So something that I really got blessed by when I first heard from you was when you talked about your different forms of capital. I don't know if you want to go into that, if you had something else in your little notepad that you wanted to cover, but for me, that was just, especially if I'm like, in the everyday grind that I'm doing the work and I can only get so many dollars an hour for what I do. And I have so many bills and it's just like, there's nothing left over at the end of the paycheck. When you talked about the varying forms of capital and my mind, and I was already doing some of them, but just to see it in that picture, do you mind sharing briefly about those?
No, not at all. I'm happy.
You talked about 8 and then you talked about 11, but I know there's at least 8 of them that I could probably recite. But.
Sure. I'm happy to go through them. And so this is a concept that I got introduced to through permaculture, but it is not original to permaculture.
Okay.
And in fact, another way these forms of capital are often presented and used is by presenting them to lower income, financial income communities to show them the wealth and richness in their lives and these other forms of capital. And so, yeah, you mentioned the 8 forms of capital, and that's how they're framed in permaculture. And so the first form of capital is the one we know and use most, financial capital. So money, currency, stocks, Wall Street capital. Another form of
that's all we have.
Yes, yeah, the one that people think is the only form of capital. Another form of capital is material capital. So it's the laptops, the computer equipment we're using right now to have this exchange, host this event. It's the houses or buildings that we're in, the cars we drive, the rocks in our yard, the physical, tangible structures and things that surround us. There is intellectual capital, which is, what we learn at school. It's our knowledge, wisdom, intellect, creativity, innovation. These are intellectual capital. Another one is living capital. So in permaculture, this is what people especially love because it's our gardens, it's the trees, the lakes, the air we breathe, the parks in our communities. That's living capital. Another form of capital is spiritual capital. And that doesn't have to be, a religious thing, going to church or any other religious practice, but it could be your yoga practice, your meditation practice, however you center yourself in this universe. Cultural capital. So cultural capital is a shared capital we create together with different groups. It's our common history, films, literature, food. You think ethnic food, so cultural forms of capital. And then there's experiential capital. So that is, the capital we gain through experience by doing something. So if I read about how to fix a bike and I increase my intellectual capital by reading about it, that's one thing. If I actually go out and, change my tire or make the repair on my bike, that's the experiential capital I get by actually doing something. You could read a recipe in a book, and that's one thing, but then actually going and cooking the recipe is that experiential capital, the experience of doing it. And then the last of those 8 is the social capital, which is the heart and soul of time banking. And that is the connections that we have with other people, with our family, with our friends, with, whatever networks or communities we're involved in. So time banking is an example of that. If someone gets a job by putting it out on Facebook that, they've lost a job and now need another one, and it's one of their contacts that, is able to connect them with a job opportunity, that's social capital as well. So those are the 8 that get talked about in permaculture, in different groups, or these have been outlined in different ways. 3 other forms of capital I've also seen talked about are, first one is time. So again, going back to this idea of your money or your life, that, it's all, you're exchanging your time for money. Mm-hmm. Your time is your only capital that you can't renew. You can't get more of it. Once it's gone, it's gone. You don't get that moment back. You can't get more of that moment, whereas you can get more of these other forms of capital generally. So there's time that people, I don't think, recognize. And with time, from what I've read, in terms of what people really want, what makes people happy, what they really want is time freedom. They want the autonomy to make decisions about how they use their time. Yes. They want to do it like I said earlier, they want to be able to do it from a place of agency. They don't want to be making those decisions out of fear. It's that time's so valuable. That's the resource that so many people want. So that's one. Another one is health, another form of capital. Without health, the rest of it really doesn't matter. So that's a super valuable form of capital: physical, emotional, mental health. And then attention capital. especially now these days, where we see what Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and, Twitter and social media, and before that, the media and YouTube, all of these places where we direct our attention. But especially now when we see how social media is making so much money for so many people off of our attention, it's a form of capital that we're just frittering away so often without thinking about it. And yet it's enriching so many people. But if we become much more cognizant and thoughtful of, okay, this is my attention, what am I getting in return for what I'm paying attention to? And I'm not saying that we need to be thinking like this all the time, but I just think thinking about it a little more. Is what I'm giving my attention to enriching me? Is it something that's enriching me is it bringing value to my life? Could I be doing something else with my attention that would be more beneficial to me, and maybe not as beneficial to someone else? It's like, can I be productive with my time as opposed to just gaming or being on social media as much as I am? Can I be, doing something if money is financial capital is something that's challenging for me? Can I direct my attention a little differently to learn a skill that will help me earn more money, or spend my time doing something that, maybe it's not going to feel like a lot of money right away, but it might build into something, and it might at least help me build better habits.
Yeah, and all of those are going to enrich me. So even though might not show up in dollar signs, it's going to do something that's going to enrich my life and make me more resilient. With just a few more minutes that we have left, I think we have about 9 minutes left. Something that's come across my mind, because I read some of what you talk about, and I have some very little money, but it is a little bit of money in the mutual fund world, in the financial world. And when I read about what you talk about with where that money is at and what it does, can you talk to people about the mindset change needed to watch what that money does that makes me the residual income? And what those companies are doing versus you're talking to people about, you might want to think about putting your money here because it does this, versus your money's there in the big corporate machine making millionaires more millions.
Well, by its very nature, the stock market is made up of companies with shareholders. So you, in essence, are a shareholder through these mutual funds. These mutual funds are shareholders. And the way that's set up, the companies are beholden to the shareholders. Their single top priority is to make a financial return for the shareholders. And that puts that priority over anything, any concern for the environment, any concern for, treating their workers or other, their customers or other people that might be impacted by the company. All of that is a lower priority, if a priority at all. And so when we think about what's happening on our planet right now and how much of a role these corporations are playing in it, if you're investing in it, you're holding that up. And so I do encourage people to look at other options outside of Wall Street. It just frustrates me to no end. And it's something people don't think about at all because we're so used to it. But why is it easier to send our money off to Wall Street to invest than it is to invest in our own communities? To find things to invest in where we live. I would much rather.
How do people learn how to do that?
So one of my favorite books is called Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. And it's all about investing in your local community. And at this point, there isn't that much infrastructure, but depending on where people live, they may live in a community that has a local investing club or some kind of infrastructure that makes it easier. But it's something we need to come together and make more accessible, you know, as a community, because it can be done. And there are places that are doing it. And the people reading that book and getting together to talk about it and approaching their community leaders, their economic development officers, and the heads of their chambers of commerce can be very helpful to that.
Say the name of that book again, please.
Put Your Money Where Your Life Is by Michael Schumann.
Okay.
I will say that, you know, divesting is one thing, and I still have a little bit of money in some socially conscious funds in the stock market, but it's a small portion of what the little I have invested. But there, you know, I've read more and more recently about how divesting isn't necessarily working the way people would hope, because as people, those of us who are concerned, are divesting, these really unsavory hedge funds and other people who don't even care as much as we do are stepping in and buying up the stock, because you sell it, you divest from it, someone or some entity is going to come in and buy it. And so something else that I think is very important for people who stay in the markets is called shareholder advocacy. And it's, especially if you're investing in anything directly, you know, instead of mutual funds, like you directly own Apple shares, you can vote your shares. You have a right to vote as a shareholder. And even with mutual funds, you can make better decisions. And if it's okay, BJ, I'm actually helping to put together an event that we're calling, I think, what did we title it? Don't Let Your Mutual Fund Destroy Your Retirement.
Nice.
And it's going to be a free webinar coming up on May 18th with a shareholder advocacy group called As You Sow. And I can share that in the Timebank and offer people Timebank credits for participating in this event and getting educated and learning about shareholder advocacy.
After tonight too, you can go in and add this on the comments so that people have the information, you know, list the books that you read, and maybe I should have done that ahead of time, but you know, live and learn. But yeah, so about 4 minutes left here. The hour goes by so fast. I'm just so pleased that you were able to come on, because I've known a little bit about you and heard bits and pieces here and there, but to have unedited Laura Oldanie for an entire hour and share with thousands and thousands of people the special part of my life that has been you, and the way that you've enriched my thinking is really great. So any last comments, things that we didn't talk about, or the way that you want to end this?
Let's see. Well, all right, a couple random notes, if I can, I jotted down. One thing would be going back to just another example of that thinking out of the box, thinking differently, and slowing down and giving yourself time to find some solutions. You know, one thing I'll do if I need something is, before I go buy it, is I'll just type into Google DIY, you know, sunscreen, or DIY, you know, hand sanitizer. And I'll see if there are recipes and I already have the ingredients for it. You know, is there something so I don't have to go out and buy it? You know, how can I make it for myself?
Nice.
You know, because there's so much information these days. That's one thought. And another thought related to that is, when I needed a shower curtain rod, I really didn't want to buy a new shower curtain rod. I knew it was either going to be plastic or metal. I don't like buying new things if I don't have to. And I wasn't finding a used one at a thrift store or, you know, yard sales. And so finally one day I looked out my window and I have this lovely patch of slender bamboo in my yard. And I knew I had found my renewable source of shower curtain rods. And then I had this beautiful, lovely piece of nature now in my bathroom that just makes me smile every time I look at it.
And that's such a perfect example of how, if we just open up what we look at, we're so, I mean, I am anyway. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm so ingrained in, you know, no, don't look sideways. Don't look sideways. You got to look forward. You got to focus. You got to produce. You got to blah, 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 blah. And we miss all this resiliency, you know? Yeah, you could have had a shiny aluminum in there, but how cool is it to have bamboo out of your own yard hanging there, and you get to see that every morning, you know? And there's so much around us that we don't need to buy. We don't we can share, we can, especially in the time bank, you know, we can
Yep.
borrow, we can use, we can lend. And there's so much more that we can do that would make our lives rich and resilient. So if you don't know Laura, now you do. You know her a little bit more. Follow her blog at richandresilientliving.com. She's mentioned a lot of books. I hope by the maybe tomorrow she can go on and put a couple of those books in the comments on YouTube or on the Facebook that has this video. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I've been looking forward to this for months because
You're
you
very
said months
welcome.
ago that this is going to be good for you. So thanks for
It's
coming
my
on.
pleasure. Yes, and if anyone wants, I have Permaculture and Prosperity course. It's a pay what you can course on my website to learn more about permaculture, wealth building and thinking, you know, and investing, regenerative investing course about investing outside of the stock market.
Oh, see there, I just found something I need to do. That's good. All right, everybody. We're going to say good
Thank
night
you,
now. Thanks
BJ.
for joining us whenever you came aboard or whenever you happen to be listening. We hope that your life becomes more rich and resilient because you've been spending some time with us. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.